Now let's turn our attention to estimating the equity risk premium. So the ERP or the MRP, which is the market risk premium. So remember, in the CAPM, that is referred to as the excess return of the market over the risk-free rate, or RM minus RF. So how would you estimate this? Well, the first approach is the historical approach. This is pretty straightforward. So what am I doing here? I'm basically going back a certain period, computing the return of the market, annualized return of the market, and I'm doing the same for the risk-free rate. But now this is going to beg a number of questions. So firstly, how do I define the market? What is the market? Now, a lot of you guys are based in the US, and you might automatically be assuming that the market is the S&P 500. I myself am heavily invested in the S&P 500. However, that is not necessarily the market, because there are a lot of other countries in the world. So maybe you want to use a global index instead. So you might say, okay, I want to be maybe 50% invested in the US and 50% invested abroad. So what is the index? How are you going to define the index? Secondly, over what time period are you calculating this ERP? Obviously, the longer the period, the more statistically accurate results you are getting. But at the same time, if you're going back 100 years, well, I'm sure you'll agree, the world is a very different place today than it was, many, even 40 years ago. Notice the advent of computing, internet, now AI is completely changing everything. So how far back can I go and still remain relevant? Next, I've got the mean type, the type of mean calculation. Am I doing arithmetic mean? Or am I doing geometric mean? Well, if I'm doing arithmetic mean, that is a great predictor for single period returns, but the geometric mean takes better care of compounding, right? Because if you want to calculate KGR, CAGR, compound annual growth rates, you always want to use the geometric mean. That's another level 1 topic. And then risk-free proxy. How do we define the risk-free rate? Now, traditionally, we've always said the US Treasury is the risk-free asset. Okay, we're not going to debate this just now, but even if we are all agreed that the US Treasury is the risk-free asset, should I use the 3-month Treasury or the 30-year Treasury? There are pros and cons. The 3-month Treasury is a lot less risky, certainly from a reinvestment perspective, and interest rate risk perspective, and even inflation perspective. But the 30-year Treasury better aligns with the long duration of equity. Remember, if you're valuing long-term equity, you should be matching this with long-term the risk-free rates. And then we need to be aware of the 2 problems of the historical approach. The first one is stationarity. So that means that by being backward looking, by, let's say, going back 10 years and saying, hey, this is what the ERP was in the past 10 years, we're actually assuming that the next 10 years will be like the past 10 years. And we know in reality that is not the case. Sometimes we get 10 years of bull markets, followed by what they call the lost decade. Yeah, so it depends really what time period you take. So that historical backward-looking approach is going to suffer from that stationarity assumption. And the other one, survivorship bias, which we've mentioned elsewhere in the syllabus. When you're looking at this return of the market, let's say the S&P 500, well, guys, you're basically looking at the 500 most successful stories. So you're excluding all the companies that either did not do so well or indeed went bankrupt. So you naturally putting this upward bias to the actual performance of the entire market. So not surprisingly then, a lot of analysts choose to, rather than be backward looking, they are choosing to be forward looking. And forward looking means essentially maybe surveying experts, seeing what the experts out there think and estimate, and then maybe using some formulaic approaches. And that's where it gets interesting for us, because now I need to show you some formula. So the first formula will be based on the dividend discount model. So if we remember the dividend discount model, it simply says P0 is D1 over cost of equity minus growth rate. Well, if we rearrange that, we can say the implied cost of equity is given by the leading dividend yield plus the nominal growth rate in dividends. Now, remember though here, what was the goal? The goal was not to calculate the implied cost of equity of the stock market, but it was to estimate the ERP, and that is RE, so the cost of equity of the market minus the risk-free rate. So if on the right-hand side here, you need to be subtracting the risk-free rate. And there's the first formula that you need to memorize. So this first item is simply the dividend yield. The second item is just the growth rate of your dividends. And the third item is your risk-free rate. And that's what I've written here. Dividend yield, nominal growth of dividends minus risk-free rate. If you know this formula, you are ready for the forward-looking approach based on the DDM, on the Gordon Growth Model. Now, drum roll, please, because now we entered the first important thing that you've never seen ever anywhere else at level 1 or level 2. So I need your maximum attention here. And this model is called the Grinold-Kroner model, but they could also test it as a macroeconomic model. So they could say Grinold-Kroner, or they could say macroeconomic model. You need to be thinking about this particular formula. Now, the formula itself looks pretty scary, I grant you that, but I will tell you the trick. So the trick is to first think of it as an extension to the Gordon. Yeah, so what did the Gordon say? The Gordon said that the ERP is driven by the dividend yield and the nominal growth. Okay, well, let's see what the Grinold-Kroner is saying. So Grinold-Kroner is saying the ERP is driven by the dividend yield and, you guessed it, the nominal growth rate. However, the Grinold, because remember it's a macroeconomic model, it wants to split the nominal growth into real growth and then expected inflation. Yeah, inflation is a macroeconomic factor. So you'll be given a real growth, and then you're going to be given separately inflation. You're going to put them together to get your nominal growth. So up to this point, there's virtually zero differences between the dividend discount model and the Grinold. But now here's where the Grinold introduces a kind of a valuation factor. It's basically looking at the P ratio of the stock market. So it's basically saying, look, take the change, the expected change in the P ratio of the stock market. So as an example, if the analyst here, remember it's all forward looking, so it's about expectations. If the analyst thinks that the market right now is underpriced, well, he's going to be expecting a positive growth in the P ratio. And that's going to boost returns, and therefore it's going to boost ERP. If, on the other hand, the market is considered overvalued, there will be a negative expectations about this change in the P ratio. And if obviously you're buying something that's overvalued, that's not a good thing. That's going to push down the ERP. The next item is probably the most confusing item of them all, and that is the change in the shares outstanding. Okay, why? Well, because we're actually trying to calculate here per share, okay? Essentially, we're trying to calculate yield per share. So if shares outstanding are increasing because companies are net issuers of shares, that's going to be dilutive. Think about the fact that whenever shares outstanding increase, EPS per share drops, dividend per share drops, and so on. So dilution is bad. So if the analyst expects shares outstanding to increase, that's going to have dilutive impact, i.e. bad impact, and that's going to push the ERP down. Obviously, if the companies are net buyers of their shares, so they're engaging in buyback programs, which we mentioned earlier in corporate issues, that of course is good on so many levels, and that's going to be boosting the ERP. And the last point, of course, remember, we're not just calculating the implied cost of equity of the market, we are calculating the equity risk premium, so we also have to subtract the risk-free rate at the end.